Hey guys, it's been quite a week. We've had two of our companies become unicorns this week. We announced our investment into Pipe, which I believe will be one of the most transformational fintech companies of all time. Obviously, I'm not the only one that thinks that. We're proud to invest with Joe Lonsdale and David Sachs and Aval Ravikant and Shamath Palihapitiya, excuse me, as well as some of the top funds, and Mark Benioff, of course, of Salesforce, and including some of the top corporates in the world, including Salesforce, Slack, Shopify, and many others who are publicly disclosed. At the same time, it's been very difficult to see the level of hate and propaganda towards both the state of Israel as well as, of course, the Jewish people, which, of course, are not always correlated nor always one and the same. But when people use these kind of straw man arguments that and these standards, I mentioned in my post, one of the main criticisms is, this member of the Knesset, which is the parliamentary system in Israel, is extreme. There's 120 members. There's 435 members in the U.S. House. The idea of using, some edge cases, somewhere probably between 5 and 10% of the Israeli parliament by subjective standards that you might apply, using that as a pretense to murder and delegitimize a country is just, first of all, absurd. Second of all, is not a standard that would ever be placed against anybody, any country in the world. And that is clearly anti-Semitism. One other thing I wanted to mention is if there was such a thing as pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli, I would be both. I think these are unnecessary divisions. Of course, there are Palestinian people, there are Israeli people, but ultimately the goals are one and the same. At least for any reasonable person on both sides, that's a two-state solution. It is good for the Palestinian people because then they get their sovereignty. And they're able to start kind of building relationships with other countries and other communities. And of course, Israel gets to live in peace. The idea that there's a pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian side, maybe at the margins makes sense. Overall, it makes no sense. It's a falsification, and it's just pitting two people in a really simplistic way. And Palestinian people, as pretty much any Israeli will tell you, because they have to go in the territories, because they have to require mandatory military service. They will tell you Palestinian people aren't just people; they're normal people. Nobody is against Palestinian people. Nobody is again. Yes, somebody 5%. Again, there's radicals on all sides. It's intrinsic to human beings. It's intrinsic to the incentives and the ego-driven nature of our race. So I just wanted to say, I addressed the really, pro-Israel. I'd say I addressed the human rights aspect on the Jewish and the Israeli side because that is what's being systematically taken away, in my opinion. I would do that in a second for the Palestinian side. Anybody that has ever watched a Knesset or argument understands that there's significant dissension and significant arguments for human rights and for the protection of both Arab Israelis as well as Palestinians and their human rights within the Israeli government, as I'm sure exists in private circles on the Palestinian side, and as I personally experienced with my own eyes as I met Palestinian businessmen in Ramallah in what is known as the West Bank. So I wanted to clear that and give anybody, in general, in any kind of argument, especially politics, that says it's you or them, us or, good or evil, is typically using it as a political ploy in order to divide and increase their power. We need less politicians. We need less corruption. Politicians are inherently corrupt, and that's because it's self-selected. It's the same as business people are inherently care about money because that's why they go into business. Politicians go into politics almost predominantly to gain influence and for narcissistic purposes. And by the way to track this is to track their views over time. It's one of the reasons, by the way, despite disagreeing with most of his policies, I respect Bernie Sanders because he has been incredibly consistent over many decades. He is a true believer, and why I don't respect many other people in Congress. With that in mind, let's move on to an interesting topic, which is inflation. I've been having a lot of different discussions on inflation, and there's two camps. Very few people talk about it. The official inflation, I think, is 1%, which of course is not the case. You can't print $7 trillion and not experience inflation. The question is, what is a true inflation? And inflation itself is defined in such a way that doesn't represent what people think it is. It's so that's why it's at 1%. But if you're really trying to figure out the value of the real dollars in the economy, there's two camps. One is that inflation is actually at about a 10 to 12%. This is unfortunately the smartest people that I know. They all kind of give similar thing. It's low teens, which of course is, the way interest rates work, it's compounding. So it's exponentially higher than state inflation. And the other camp, which is a little bit more nuanced, believes that inflation and the US dollar and the currency is protected by the military strength. And in other words, as long as the US military has supremacy, then inflation and the US dollar will stay the reserve currency, which is a really good argument as well. The next kind of natural question becomes, what drives the military power in the United States? And of course, it's basically two factors. One is GDP and GDP growth, which is almost exclusively, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's almost exclusively new jobs are created by venture-backed companies in the venture ecosystem. And the second aspect is what percentage of GDP spending is allocated towards defense, which is why you have countries like North Korea, despite having terrible GDP and not many resources, able to have disproportionately powerful militaries because they're starving, millions of people and taking those resources and putting it into military. Same thing with countries like Venezuela and Russia and other types of countries, although obviously on a much smaller scale. So the question becomes, what is the GDP prospects and the military prospects of the U.S.? If we could answer that question, then we could very accurately predict inflation over the next 10 to 20 years. And we could also make very knowledgeable decisions on things such as crypto investments and those things. So, which to add more controversy, it's one of the main issues with cancel culture. So the question is, what is so bad about cancel culture? What is so bad, and what will happen in the United States if it continues to proliferate? What is the natural end to that culture and to the undertakings? And the question and the answer is actually we know. How do we know? Because we've seen a microcosm in the city of San Francisco in the state of California. There's one individual that is notorious in the city of San Francisco. It's not well known outside, and that's the district attorney, Chesa Boudin, who will likely, probably not for the reasons he would hope, or maybe that's, he just would like notoriety at any cost, but he'll probably go down as the most influential politician in the history of the city of San Francisco, because he has single-handedly driven out about a third of the top entrepreneurs in the city within a couple of years span, and essentially he has fragmented and decentralized Silicon Valley. What's interesting about it is California had a significant surplus. Of course, this is a lagging indicator. This is pre-Chesa Boudin. Within 4 to 5 years, California will likely be in a severe recession and likely will have to be bailed out and or declare bankruptcy. So we've seen that with the city of San Francisco, and the main takeaways is I think politicians like Chesa Boudin and other kind of far left politicians, they falsely took entrepreneurs at their word. Entrepreneurs were going out and virtue signaling, saying, a lot of good stuff like pro-gay rights, which, by the way, have been in support since the 1990s, before it was popular, but also just nonsense. Things like abolish the police, which would have disastrous effects, not on the police. They would just get their pension, but on the communities, and specifically on minority communities and things like that. And they were repeating these things, and the politicians erroneously assumed that means that they actually believed these things, and that they were basically there to stay. And very quickly they realized that was not the case. And they've driven out, not only have they driven out a third of entrepreneurs, by my calculations, by my non-empirical but anecdotal understanding, but they've also driven out the very, very best. They drove out Elon Musk, which not only is, I believe, still the richest person in the world, and the greatest, I would argue, the greatest innovator of all time. If you look at the history of Thomas Edison, you'll soon realize that he's very good at taking credit, and he is an incredible scientist, but he is no Elon Musk, not even close. And the second order effects, outside of just taking out, companies like Tesla, which I believe still have, 10x left in growth. Of course, I invested in the space and in a non-competitive but similar like company. So that's unbiased, but very likely, not only that, Elon Musk moving was a watershed moment for entrepreneurship, and it every entrepreneur that I've ever met just looks up at Elon Musk, understands the sacrifice, the pain, he calls it looking at the horizon and chewing on glass. Everybody understands. The more sophisticated they are, the more they appreciate Elon Musk and everything that he has done for society and all the sacrifices that he has done. And they look at him and they say, if Elon's gone, I'm gone. And that is a irreversible thing, because what ends up happening in cities like San Francisco, which I'm going to kind of compare and basically extrapolate into the United States as a whole, is that you have these self-perpetuating circles. So tech leaves, which empowers politicians like Chesa Boudin to have more power, says, oh, look, all these tech people are disloyal. They don't like getting punched in the face and getting stabbed with needles. They're bad people. Elect me, give me more resources so I could drive out the other 2/3, essentially. Not his words. By the way, Chesa Boudin is one of the most talented politicians I've ever met, which makes it ever most depressing. He's incredibly, he has an ability to look directly in your face and lie to you in a way that I've only experienced once in my entire life, with 100% certainty. And he is articulate and smart. And I think in his mind, either suicidal or self-sanctimonious. He actually believes what he's doing. He believes in the Machiavellian style of politics that he's playing. He's a very dangerous adversary, which I've been saying for much time. Of course, the ego says otherwise to other entrepreneurs, and of course they strawmanned her and said, "Oh, he's an idiot. He's just blah blah blah," and they underestimated him. And and that's what happened to San Francisco. So if we extrapolate to the United States, what is going to happen is, again, it's important to understand that even though only a third of all top entrepreneurs in San Francisco have left, they're disproportionate to the very, very talented and the most successful ones for two separate reasons. Most successful, they have infinite kind of resources. They could live anywhere. They could, set up their own country if they really wanted to. And two, very, very successful in that they can't just turn off their brain. Sometimes I wish I could turn off my brain and not think, because it's hard to actually be an independent thinker in this society. It's literally hard. I probably should get medication just to basically survive and be able to cope with the amount of disinformation that we receive on individual days. So if we look at that, the next, again, it was inconceivable to people in San Francisco that people would leave San Francisco. They took, entrepreneurship for granted there, and entrepreneurs, and they just assumed that no matter how anti-tech they would be, no matter how many needles they stabbed them with, no matter how many homeless people were able to punch and spit at these tech entrepreneurs without any pressing of charges by, of course, Chesa Boudin, that they would just stay. And of course, that proved to be false. Now, it took an extreme case, but we are precipitously going towards that extreme case in the United States, which basically goes to the next point, which is if we continue with this, I don't even know what to call, cancel culture, woke culture. It's certainly not woke. It is the exact opposite of woke. It is completely brain dead and asleep. It's not progressivism. It's because it's not based on human rights. It's not based on anything except basically like short-term ego satisfaction, hatred, and basically that. It's not progressive. It's not actually advancing anybody's rights, any economic justice, any social justice, any voting rights. Nothing. It's just literally just hating with significant blowback from all the political scientists that I understand. Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, who, by the way, was, I think, legitimately framed as a moderate. The only reason Trump lost was because of his personality, and he almost did not lose. If Trump was a generic Republican, he would have destroyed Joe Biden. Is the sense, and that's what the data shows. If you look at the House and the Senate elections, so again, it doesn't really help. It's a policy made by essentially 6-year-olds that want to bully other people. Like it's not even a public policy. But if we continue proliferating that and propagating that, what's going to happen is at some point, entrepreneurs are just going to say enough. Like, I just want a free society where I could build my businesses, where I could safely live with my family, where human rights matters, where diversity matters, all these things. I'm going to go to another country that, does not victimize me and does not see me as fundamentally evil for, trying to create world-changing enterprises. Net inflows, net outflows from the U.S., will probably go to places like Singapore, Taiwan, and places like that, maybe even New Zealand, if enough people actually expect kind of a World War III or something like that. It's going to be it's not going to be one location. That's what everybody falsely misunderstood about San Francisco. They said, oh, where are they going to go from San Francisco? Where are they going to go to New York? Are they going to go to Austin? Are they going to Miami? Like, there's no one place. And the answer is fragmentation. So you don't have to go to one place to leave a place. And that's typically not how it works. So, if we don't kind of call out this, I will give it the benefit of the doubt and call it a policy of wokeness and cancel culture. If we don't significantly call that out, in probably the next 4 to 6 years, we'll see a net outflow of emigration into other countries, which will directly affect GDP in a dramatic way. There's a Pareto principle. If 5%, the top 5% of entrepreneurs leave, we might experience the greatest recession since the 1920s. Which of course will leave less GDP for military spending. Military spending in general is problematic because we're fighting a new age world with old war technologies. There's certain people like Anduin Industries and Palantir, where I'm an investor in Palantir and a proud supporter of them. I'm a proud supporter that we have a startup that is looking for American interests in the world. Anybody that thinks America is evil has just never lived in a communist country and knows very little about the world, knows very little about the pathology of other dictatorships around the world. And we need more startups in the defense industry. Again, by the way, 90% of people in Silicon Valley agree with that. It's the 2% mob, woke, whatever you want to call it, that are intimidating and bullying the other 90% from actually, doing things in an absurd ways. Google will do business and Apple will do business with China, which is, has anywhere from 100,000 to a million, prisoners from the Uyghur people in Northwest China. That is somehow, I don't know, people don't talk about it. Republicans will bring it up as a prop to criticize China, but they don't care. Democrats certainly don't care. They care about the fact that they're working for the Department of Defense, which, America has always been the shining light and the beacon for the entire world, and the defender of true human rights and of true peace and democracy. Have we been perfect? No. Again, impossible standard to hold a country of 350 million. Impossible standard to hold a democratically elected government that changes every 4 years and a Congress that changes every 2 years. People that hold us to that standard just hate America and are looking for kind of backwards rationalization. So all that being said, going back to inflation, what will be the long-term inflation? It depends on whether we are able to cancel people like Chesa Boudin, not by socially murdering them, but by basically saying, no, enough. Like, we don't want this. We don't want you to incite violence against Asian Americans and then go and hashtag stop Asian American violence. We don't need that hypocrisy. We don't need that pathology. We reject that. We have to say the same thing to AOC. Just pathological. She's actually norming anti-Semitism as we speak. This week, it is more normal to be openly anti-Semitic than it was 2 weeks ago. We always say, oh, that can never happen, this can never happen. Norms change dramatically. If you think we live in a society that anyway resembles society from, even 2 years ago, or even more so from 8 years ago, then you're just norming your psychology. What would fly today would never fly. Being openly anti-Semitic would just not be acceptable, nor should it be. The only positive light that has changed in the other direction has been the defense and the intolerance towards the anti-LGBTQ and support of the LGBTQ community, which I will always stand with anywhere in the world, and believe continues to be systematically oppressed in ways that are just incredible oppression of civil rights and human rights, and unfortunately sometimes by our allies, and certainly sometimes by the so-called progressive wing of the Demo and their main allies, which I will not go into. So, in short, that's a little bit on inflation, Chesa Boudin, Elon Musk, the immigration from San Francisco, the potential immigration from the United States and the second order effects to our military, to our ability to not only sustain our currency and be the reserve currency for the United States, but also for our ability to ensure a minimum level of human rights in all continents, whether it be Africa or Asia, or of course the Middle East, which is also Asia. um, so not the most positive light, but this is why I'm taking such a strong stance about it. It's not because I don't have enough things to do. It's because what I've seen going on is like I said, it's the opposite of woke. It's asleep. It's the opposite of progressivism. It is fascism and racism, and dehumanization, and using people as a prop. Minorities are not a prop for you to wave around to get electoral votes. Minorities are not a prop to kind of infantilize and then protect. All any minority ever wants is an equal shot, an ability to have economic and primarily justice, as well as social justice. That's all, a fair shot. So with that, I will say goodnight and thank you for listening.